The two most popular Cubase compressors have also been updated. Let's start with how they looked in the previous versions of Cubase, starting with the Vintage Compressor. Now, this does look like an 1176 style compressor in its appearance, but some of the controls were kind of small, like the punch and the auto buttons, and the auto is for the auto release. Both of those buttons actually kind of looked like either lights or rivets. They didn't really look like controls. So a lot of people didn't know that you could click on them to enable the punch and the auto compressor release. And then the other thing that was a little tough was that the input and output meters only had 6 segments. So it was tough to get an accurate reading on exactly what your input and output levels going into and out of the plugin were. But in Cubase 9.5, it has a whole new appearance. So let's go into this drum channel. I'm just going to solo that right now. And then let's load the Vintage Compressor into the first insert slot. So I'm going to go to the Dynamics category and scroll down a bit here to the V's, where we'll find Vintage Compressor. So you'll notice that the control panel looks quite a bit different now. The controls are much larger, and instead of having an analog VU meter, it has this multi-segment LED. So you get a much more accurate reading on what the gain reduction actually is. And also the punch and auto buttons are nice and big now, so there's no mistaking what these are on the control panel. And also the input meter and output meter have a multi-segment LED now, which is much more precise. So let's go ahead and get some audio playing through this plugin. We'll be able to see the input and output meters. You can see they're a lot more precise, so it's easier to see exactly how much signal is going into and out of the plugin. Then let's go ahead and add some compression by increasing the input here. When we look at the gain reduction meter, we get a much better representation of the gain reduction amount, and it even gives you the numeric value up here. The maximum amount of gain reduction so far is almost -7 dB. Then we could enable the punch here. Let's go ahead and set it to 4:1 ratio. And then now we've got a whole bunch of output happening, so let's back off the output. And you can see that it has that peak meter here at the top in the numeric value. So that helps you keep an eye on the overall output level of the compressor. Let's drop that down again and double click on that. We can see exactly how much output is coming out at any given time right here. And we still have things like the mix control to allow us to mix some of the dry signal in with the compressed signal, thereby giving us a parallel style of compression. And all those things make the Vintage Compressor much easier to use and to program. So now let's talk about the Tube Compressor, because they've made some changes here. In the older version, you had this kind of skeuomorphic tube that would glow in the background here, and we had the same sort of issue with the input and output meters in that 6 segments just really isn't enough to give you a very accurate reading. And the VU meter was kind of blue and red, and some people who were colorblind were a little bit taken aback by that color scheme. So in the new version of the Tube Compressor, they've made some changes. So let's come over to the bass group right here. I'm going to solo that and hit the edit button. And then let's install the Tube Compressor into the first insert slot by going to Dynamics, then scrolling down to the T's, where we'll find Tube Compressor. So now the interface looks much different, and the LEDs for the input and output are much more precise. Let's go ahead and get some audio playing through that. So now you can see exactly how much signal is coming in and how much signal is going out. Let's go ahead and bring some more input in, drive it a little bit harder, and you can see that the VU meter is now more monochromatic, so folks that are colorblind will have a much easier time getting a read on the gain reduction VU meter here. Let's take some of the output down a little bit. Then let's look at some of the other controls. There are 2 new controls, one of which is character, and the other is the ratio control. The character control adds saturation to the high frequencies, but not to the low frequencies, which means that it will retain the punch and the impact of the low frequency information by adding some of that tube saturation to the high frequencies only. Let's take a listen. And notice that we never lost any low end. Then we have 2 different ratio controls. I don't know quite what the ratios are, but you can choose a lower ratio for a more invisible type of compression, or a higher ratio for a more obvious compression effect. Then all of the sidechain controls are located under this panel, and to get to them, just click on SC for sidechain, and now you still have the same filter type, frequency, Q factor, and monitor controls for sidechaining the tube compressor. So those are the new compressors. Next, let's talk about flux.